Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Jack Hagel. For months, Republican political operatives largely ignored the presidential race in North Carolina. But then Kamala Harris took the Democratic nomination and gained ground in the Tar Heel state. Now, Republican Donald Trump is buying up ads in the state. So too are Republicans trying to keep Trump out of office. WRAL state government reporter Will Doran joins us to explain why and what it says about this battleground state. Will, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
Take me back to the beginning of July. What did the presidential race look like in North Carolina?
It was looking great for Republicans. You were seeing Trump's lead widening. Back in 2020, he won North Carolina by 1.5% of the vote. And we had seen some polls that were, Trump up by 6% of the vote, Trump up by 8% of the vote. And this was even with Biden spending like crazy on ads here. He was visiting all the time, all across the state, and the polls just weren't budging. And it was looking pretty bad for the Democrats in June and into July.
Then there was that famous debate, and very shortly thereafter, Kamala Harris enters the race, and Republicans start paying attention.
They had to. The polls were showing that Harris was really ramping up here in North Carolina with her support from people right here. And, like I said, the polls were all Trump +6, Trump +8 over Biden. With Harris, what we've seen in the last couple of weeks, they've been like Trump +2, Trump +3. And, these are with margins of error of 3 or 4 percentage points. So it's, you could call it a statistically tied race here in North Carolina. So, yes, the Donald Trump campaign has now just with, a few days ago started buying ads for the first time here in North Carolina. Obviously Democrats have been on the air a lot. So, Trump now sees the need to start playing catch up here and get his ads out, his messaging out, and clearly sees North Carolina as being in play again. We've been so used to being a swing state. It had been looking for a while that was not going to be the case anymore for this year. But surprise, surprise, we are a battleground once again.
Now, moderate conservatives and some disaffected Republicans are also perking up. What are they doing?
Yeah. This week we saw the Harris campaign launch a group called Republicans for Harris that was led by some former Republican political activists and politicians, folks like Bob Orr, the former state Supreme Court justice, Jeff Duncan, the former lieutenant governor in Georgia, some other folks more local here in North Carolina, and basically making the pitch of, look, we don't agree with Harris on just about all of her policies, but we think that Trump is just dangerous for America. And so we would rather have someone that we disagree with, but don't fear in office. That's kind of their pitch. And then I also spoke with Rick Wilson, the former Florida GOP political strategist who leads the Lincoln Project. And he's kind of, for folks who don't know him, the leading voice of the Never Trump conservative movement. And he told me that his group was not planning on getting involved here in North Carolina for a while because they had seen the same thing that all of us saw. The polls were really bad for Biden. But now that Harris has kind of put us back in play, he said they are going to be coming back to North Carolina, making a move to sway about 100,000 or so voters he thinks is all it's going to take among those moderate Republicans to flip the state blue and stop Trump from getting back into the White House.
And what do Republicans have to say? Are they worried?
Well, like I said, they've started buying ads here, so that indicates that they might be worried. But, when you talk to them, they say, no, we're not worried. Trump is going to win North Carolina for the third straight time. He has got this. Kamala Harris is just too far left, and you're not going to be able to convince moderate suburban Republicans to vote for a California liberal.
Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll hear about the other groups Democrats are trying to lure to the polls in November. Stick around. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. We're talking with WRAL state government reporter Will Doran about the tightening presidential race in North Carolina. Will, based on your reporting, it appears the Lincoln Project has done quite a bit of math on North Carolina. Who specifically are they targeting?
There's really two distinct groups that they see as flippable among the disaffected Republicans. You've got your suburban women, particularly in the Charlotte and Raleigh suburbs, where they're going to be hitting hard. with ads on abortion, things like that. And then they also have what Rick calls the National Security Republicans. And this is veterans and also just folks who are kind of in the more like neocon strain, the Bush era, Reagan era Republican Party, who have a pretty hawkish view on foreign policy, really don't like Trump's more isolationist views that he has been pushing as he runs for re-election here. Don't like seeing him, saddling up with foreign dictators in other countries. And so they think those two groups of people have 100,000 or so people here in North Carolina fall into one or two or both of those categories. And they think they can convince them, even if those folks normally would vote Republican, to vote for Harris this time around.
Now, those are some pretty small groups. Do you think they can sway enough of those voters to really make a difference?
Well, they think they can. Otherwise, they would not be spending a lot of money here. And we should note Trump won North Carolina by a pretty small margin in 2020. He won it comfortably over Hillary Clinton in 2016. But 2020, he only won by fewer than 75,000 votes. And this was out of 5.5 million people who voted that year. So barely 1% of the vote. And so, if you take 30,000 people in the Wake County suburbs, 30,000 people in the Charlotte suburbs, 5 or 10,000 in Greensboro, Fayetteville, Wilmington, that seems doable. Now, it's definitely a tall ask, especially I think now that, they're trying to convince these moderate Republicans to vote for Kamala Harris and not Joe Biden, who had a long track record of being a moderate in the U.S. Senate. Harris is certainly not a moderate. So they will face a bit of a challenge there. But, the math works out. You look at the primary we had in March, there were 280,000 people who voted in the Republican primary against Donald Trump. Most of them voted for Nikki Haley. But, if you're looking at, okay, Donald Trump won here by 75,000 votes in 2020. Now in 2024, he has 280,000 people voting against him in a low turnout primary. I think there is some cause for concern for Republicans there.
Democrats are also getting a boost from other voters just simply because Harris isn't Biden. We talked about that recently with our colleague Laura Leslie. But then a few days ago, Harris picked Minnesota Governor Tim Walz as her running mate. How could that affect the race in North Carolina?
That's a good question. It certainly won't affect the race in North Carolina as much as if she had picked Roy Cooper. But as we all know, Cooper took himself out of the running. Walz is definitely on the progressive side of the party, at least now. He was a pretty moderate member of Congress when he was in Congress, but since he's become governor of Minnesota, he's had a very decidedly progressive track record there. So does that turn out younger voters? I think it could. The question, and this has been the question for Democrats every election going back as long as I've been a reporter and probably longer, is how do they get young people to actually show up and vote? Because, when you look at the polling, young people do lean really far left, but then come election day, their voter turnout rates are just way lower than middle-aged or older folks. And so, this seems to be a play by the Democrats to say, okay, we need to get, two progressives on the ticket, Harris and Walz, turn out some of those younger people. It could also play in rural areas. Democrats have been bleeding support for a couple of decades now in rural North Carolina. But there are, large rural black communities in North Carolina who could be energized by seeing Kamala Harris on the ballot. And, there are large, rural everybody in North Carolina who might like seeing a college or a high school football coach like Tim Walz on the ballot. I think he could play up that part of.
And someone who grew up on a farm.
Exactly. He has those bona fides. He's a hunter. I saw their campaign announced that they had made $1 million selling camo hats saying Harris Walz on them. So they're clearly trying to lean into that and take away some of those voters from the Republicans. Will that work? I'm not sure. You talk to Republicans and they say Harris made a terrible mistake picking this progressive guy instead of a more moderate choice as her VP, because they can point to laws that he signed as governor. They can say, look, this guy raised taxes in Minnesota to pay for a paid family leave program. this guy signed a red flag law that, something that liberals have pushed for, conservatives dislike, to let people, law enforcement, take guns away from people who are deemed a threat to themselves or others. So while Democrats certainly hope his track record helps turn out younger voters, I think Republicans are hoping his track record is going to help turn off older or more conservative voters.
Now, Harris isn't just narrowing the lead in North Carolina. What's happening in other battleground states?
Similar stories all across the board. When I was talking with Rick Wilson about why they made the choice to start here in North Carolina, and he says because the polling has changed so much in the post-Biden moment was the phrase he used. But he says not just North Carolina. Originally they were really only looking at those key Midwestern states, but he said now it seems like Georgia might be in play again, Arizona might be in play again, Nevada might be in play again. The Sun Belt states, like they call it. So, I think polling still shows Trump up in many of these states or tied. Harris obviously still has some work to do. This is by no means a sign that Harris is going to win this election. Trump is still looking pretty good in the polling, but it's no longer looking like he's going to cruise to victory like it had looked even 6-8 weeks ago.
It's going to be a very, very interesting few months ahead. Thanks, Will.
Thank you.
That's WRAL state government reporter Will Doran for his recent article on the battle over moderates in North Carolina. Go to the NC Capital section of WRAL.com. I'm Jack Hagel. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and for making us part of your morning routine. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email with Triangle news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.